Hello, my name is Jacqueline, and today I wanted to talk about playing with percussive techniques on the harp. Now this is quite a large topic, and I'm not going to try to be comprehensive today. Instead, I just picked out a few different techniques that I really enjoy and use in playing the harp. And for each one, I'll explain a bit about it and demonstrate how to play it, maybe mention where it might be useful to use this sort of technique. And I'll show all of these things in isolation, so I'm not going to show them within repertoire today. And I've tried to pick a variety of techniques, so I'll talk some about, tapping on the soundboard, playing and muffling, playing with the nail, playing with the thunder technique, a lot of different things. And this is kind of a little bit of an ambiguous area, what counts as a percussive technique. So some of these things are standard techniques in playing the harp, some of them are extended techniques in playing the harp, some of them might come up in other areas when talking about different ways to play the harp. But I thought this would be interesting just to look at this kind of smattering of different techniques and how they work. Let's start with talking about tapping on the harp. As far as percussive techniques go, this is a pretty obvious one. And there are two general areas where people tap. One is the soundboard of the harp, and then the other is the body of the harp wrapped around the back a bit. And those two areas work really well because those are the resonant areas of the harp. And then while tapping, you can use a lot of different parts of your hand. You can use your fingertips, you can use your knuckles, or you can use the flat of the hand. And you can tap equally easily, generally, with either hand in all of these different ways. Tapping with the fingertips on the soundboard is probably the most common kind of tapping. People do that in a couple of different ways. Some people like to have their fingertips curved, and then they tap like that. Other people like to have more of a flat approach, like that. You can hear those give slightly different sounds already. And there's so many variations to all of these different types of tapping. Some composers might specify that you trade off with individual fingers while tapping with your fingertips, like you could alternate, like so, or even using 3 different fingers. That can work quite well, although sometimes it's a challenge to have your fingertips all sound at an equal volume. That can be something for sure to work on with tapping. Sometimes composers also ask you to tap in different areas of the soundboard, so you might be tapping up high here and then maybe down low here. And again, you can hear how the sound changes with all of that. If you're using your knuckles to tap, usually what you do is you just make a fist and then you try to get kind of nicely up on the knuckle to get a really good sound. You can hear how different that is from tapping with the fingertips. I think it's kind of a sharper, crisper sound. And then you can also tap with the flat of the hand, as I mentioned, kind of like a slap. That's usually a pretty loud sound. Sometimes it can be a very dramatic thing to have a slap in the middle of a piece. To tap on the body of the harp, you use a couple of same basic approaches. So with the fingertips, you just kind of come around a bit and tap like so. And you can hear that's a different sound from this. Sometimes I find it a little bit more awkward to tap on the body of the harp, so frequently I lean myself back a little bit just to give a little bit more room, and I really use my knee to hold the harp steady when doing that. With the knuckles, again, the sound changes. Here are the knuckles on the soundboard, and then here's the knuckles on the body. You don't usually slap on the body of the harp, I think, just because it's hard to come at that with a good angle, so usually slapping is just on the soundboard. There are so many different ways all of these types of tapping could be combined. And sometimes within a piece of music, you might have a passage that is just tapping, maybe something like, or sometimes you have a passage where you're playing with one hand and tapping with the other. So there's really so many options. And sometimes the composers are very specific about what they want, where they want you to tap on the harp, what part of the hand they want you to use. Sometimes it's much more open, and they just say, to tap with no further instruction. And frequently in those cases, I think you can use a bit of artistic license to see what you think would suit the music best. Next, I'd like to talk about a few percussive techniques that involve using the strings in some unusual ways. The first of these is the whistle technique, and this is really a fun and easy one. All you do is you set up your hand flat on the strings, making sure that all of your hand is touching. And usually you do this on the wire strings. And then you just slide your hand along the strings. And you can hear that makes a whistling sound. So it's really very easy to do. And you can either go up or down, or you could do several in a row. And you can vary the speed, so you could have a very slow whistle or a really fast one. And that's about all there is to that one. You can't really do it higher in the strings because you don't get much of a sound. You can hear there's very little sound there. So usually, as I said, you use these low wire strings for it. And there's not too many ways you can vary it. It's a fairly soft effect, and you don't really have any control over the pitch. But sometimes within a piece, maybe something kind of atmospheric, especially if you have a sparse moment, this can be very effective to add a whistle in. For a contrast to that, we have the thunder effect. This is also quite fun. What you do for this one is you use the flat of your hand again, but you start away from the strings and then you come in and kind of bounce off of them. And as I said, this is quite fun to do. A lot of times I think of my hand kind of like a mallet, like a big gong mallet. So I'm trying to keep it really flat, and then I'm thinking about really hitting the strings and bouncing right off. And usually this technique is used on the low wire strings like the whistle, because that's where you get the maximum amount of sound down here. But you can also do it a little higher. There's just less resonance. It's a kind of a more muted sound up higher on the harp. You could also use both hands and trade off. That'd be quite fun. And this is obviously a fairly loud technique. You could make it a little bit softer, but generally it is on the loud side, and usually it really makes a statement. People notice both with the sound and visually if you have thunder in a piece. One more unusual way that you can play the strings is the thunder glissando. So even though this also has the word thunder in it, it is not the same approach as the thunder technique that I just showed you. Instead, a thunder glissando is where you play a regular glissando, but on purpose, you overplay. You play too hard and try to let all of the strings kind of crash into each other and really make a bit of a racket as you play. You can hear that's a very loud technique. It's really extremely abrasive. And if you're doing it well, it kind of is taxing for your fingers because you're playing so hard. So generally you don't want to practice this one too much and end up with a blister or something on your fingers. Again, it works really well on the wire strings because you can get a lot of crashing around down there. You can do it up higher, but again, it's just a little bit lesser of a technique. A lot of times when I do it, actually, rather than just doing a glissando with one finger the way I normally would, I go ahead and use a couple of fingers to maximize the effect. So I'm not going to play it once more because I want to save my fingers, but that is the thunder glissando. Next, I thought we would look at some ways of playing that are a bit less dramatic than the techniques that I was just showing. All of these approaches involve muffling or stopping the sound in one way or another. The harp is an interesting instrument because there's so much resonance to it. And so generally when playing, if you want to dampen or muffle the sound at a particular time, you have to add a second physical motion to do that, to stop the sound. And harpists use muffles in a general way, quite frequently. For example, you might come to the end of a piece, let something ring for a bit, and then do a muffle like this to stop the sound and signal that the piece is over. Or sometimes you might be playing a passage and maybe do a wire muffle if something is ringing down there, you know, on a fermata or something that can come up. But you can also muffle more individualized strings. So one way that you can come up with a staccato effect on the harp is you could play a chord and then return immediately to the same strings to cut off the sound and give it a short sound, like that. And you could do that at varying lengths. You could come back extremely quickly, or you could come back just a little bit later. You could also play a chord and come back with the flat of the hands to muffle rather than coming back to the exact same strings. That can be an option. And so putting in an extra muffle like this does take some time because now you have two motions instead of one to play the chord. So using such a technique, usually it has to be with some space between what you're playing. It couldn't be as quick as just going up like that. So there are some limitations to this, but it can be a very nice, effective technique. Another classic way that you can muffle the sound while playing is to use a flat thumb or the Etoufée technique. And for this, what you do is you put your hand in a vertical position and you make sure that your palm is resting on the strings. Some people, when they put their hand in a vertical position, automatically try to do a harmonic position, but this is not quite that. It's a little different. And then you play with your thumb, and as you do, you just push off with your palm. And the great thing about playing this way is that it gives you a lot of flexibility to muffle really seamlessly. So as I'm playing, my hand is just coming right back to the string that I just played and cutting off the string as I go up the scale. And that's much more efficient than coming back with the kind of a full muffle that I was just showing. Doing this, you can really play at full speed and still muffle at the same time. If you're coming back down the scale, usually you just kind of angle your hand a little bit to muffle with the base of the hand. And then in playing this way, you can change the sound a bit. You could either make it something kind of leisurely, like where the sound just happens to disappear as you're going along, or you could make it much more obvious and really chop off the sound. So there's a lot of ways you can vary the sound with exactly how you use that flat thumb. A closely related technique is the flat octave. And the flat octave is just like the flat thumb. You have your thumb, set up vertically and your hand all flat on the strings, but then you add your fourth finger an octave below and play both the thumb and the fourth finger at the same time. And again, there's all kinds of possibilities for muffling within this as you play. Generally, as I ascend, I kind of swoop by the lower string to muffle that, and then the other string that's ringing is taken care of with my palm coming in. So you can have a really clean sound. And going back down, you can, again, angle your hand a little bit to muffle the top string, and then this string is naturally muffled with the palm in the middle. And once again, there are lots of alterations, so you could really come back and make it a pretty dramatic effect, or you could make it a bit of a slower effect. So lots of different ways that you can do the staccato in there with the flat octave. One thing to mention that's very important about both the flat thumb and the flat octave is that they are techniques only for the left hand. You do not use them with the right hand, I think, because the strings get too short. It'd be very hard to fit a flat hand up in the higher parts of the harp. So it's just for the left hand, both the flat octave and the flat thumb. I wanted to talk about one more technique involving muffling today. This technique usually is for the right hand. I think the left hand has so many great options with the flat thumb and the flat octaves and everything that this is not needed as much for the left hand. But with the right hand, you can, when playing a scale that ascends, you can muffle the previously ringing string with your knuckle, which sounds quite strange. But what you do is you play a string, and then as you're placing the next string, you purposefully take your knuckle and touch the ringing string to cut off the sound. And that's a bit strange because normally when you're placing, you are not trying to do this. You're trying to do the opposite and come in really cleanly. But this is, again, an efficient way to muffle because it doesn't take an extra motion or extra time to do this. And there are some options to the way you use the sound. You could have it cut off kind of subtly, like so, or you could make it, again, much more obvious and really bring out the effect. So that works for ascending scales. They do need to be all stepwise. Otherwise, if you're jumping from this string to this string, you can't have your knuckle touch the previous string. So they must be all in a row for it to work. And then coming down, if you're descending, the knuckle muffle doesn't work. What you usually do instead is you use your thumb to muffle. So you would play a string, And then as you're moving on to the next string, you set up your thumb on the previous ringing string as if you were about to play it, but then you don't. You just let go with your thumb and only play with the second finger. So those are a couple of more options for ways to play and muffle while playing simultaneously. One question many people have is about when to use all of these different techniques. And there's a lot of individual choice in the matter. If you're playing a piece and you see that it's marked with staccatos or sometimes with a lot of rests, you could try some of these options to really bring those things out and see if that really gets the articulation that the composer was looking for across. Some of them, though, also can just be used if you want maybe a cleaner sound, especially as some of the flat thumbs and flat octaves. I use those all the time, frequently not in a staccato way, but just in a way to keep everything a bit more distinct and a bit cleaner. So all of these have some options for where you think they might be best suited or what type of piece might really lend itself to these various ways of playing and muffling. Finally today, I wanted to talk about two more ways of playing that alters a sound in a percussive way. And the first of these is to play with the fingernail. Now generally in classical harp, we do not play with the fingernail, you just play on the pads of your finger. But you can use the nail to play, although it's rare. To do this, what you do is you kind of wiggle the string right underneath the tip of the fingernail, and then you pull like that. And then you can hear that that changes the sound to be a lot more abrasive than a normal playing technique. Now, there are quite a few limitations to playing with the fingernail. One is that you cannot play very loud, as that would require so much force that it could easily damage your fingernail. And then another limitation is that this is a very precise technique, so it takes a little bit of time to set up. So hopefully if you're playing a piece with a fingernail playing like this, it's something where you have a moment to set up each string, or maybe if you're even doing a chord, you have time to really kind of wiggle in there and be nicely on the fingernail. Sometimes students ask me about how to have their nail be a good length for that. This can be a bit of a challenge. So usually what I do if I'm playing a piece where I need that fingernail technique is I grow my fingernails out just a tiny bit. Normally I keep them very short, but I would grow them out a little bit further than this, so there's a little bit more fingernail to work with. And once I have them at the perfect length, then I file them to keep them there, rather than cutting my fingernails all the way down the way that I usually do. And then finally, I wanted to talk about playing with a pick. You can use a guitar pick to play the harp. So I have here just a standard plastic guitar pick, and this is a similar sound to the fingernail, but it is definitely a lot easier to play louder because you can really lean in on that pick in a way that you cannot on your fingernail. And it's also, I think, faster to set up once you have the pick in your hand. That can take a moment. Usually if I'm playing with a pick, I keep it on my bench next to me, or sometimes I'll set it on my leg here, although, you know, it's always a worry that it might fall off. But you do need a moment in the music to pick it up and have it ready in your hand in the playing position. But then I think it's really quite a fun percussive sound, and obviously you could have a pick in each hand, so you are limited in only being able to play one string at a time with a pick, but other than that, there's quite a lot you can do with it. Oh, both with the nail and with the pick. You could do glisses. That would be a nail gliss, and you can also do a gliss with the pick this way, and again, that's quite a loud sound, but that can be a great option. I hope this has given you some new ideas about percussive techniques on the harp, and hopefully you can incorporate them in your playing, or possibly even in some composing or arranging for the harp. But good luck to you in your playing and using these new techniques.